This week, 2024 is set to be an election super year, with dozens of countries heading to the polls worldwide, including the United States. How will the outcome of these elections shape the geopolitical landscape? Also, after months of uncertainty and political chaos, Senegal appears to have elected Africa's youngest president. With over one-third of African countries holding elections in 2024, who will emerge as the continent's next leaders? We'll look at Senegal's experience and the future of democracy on the continent. Straight Talk Africa starts now. Hello there and a warm welcome to Straight Talk Africa. It is great to be with you. We're coming to you from VOA's headquarters in Washington. I'm Haydé Adams. Thank you so much for joining us. Worldwide, 2024 looks set to be the biggest global election year in history, a super election year, with more voters heading to the polls than ever before. That's around 4 billion people. More than 60 countries plus the European Union are scheduled to hold national elections, the outcome of which could shape geopolitics for years to come. And one of the most widely watched elections will take place right here in the United States in November, as both Democratic President Joe Biden and Republican former President Donald Trump battle for the White House. Now, when it comes to U.S. election coverage, VOA's national correspondent Steve Herman has seen and done it all. And Steve joins me here in studio now. Steve, what a pleasure to have you here with us. Help us understand what is going on. 2024 will see the U.S. have its first presidential rematch since 1956. What is at stake for the U.S. and for the future of this country in November, Steve?
Yes, and Donald Trump is trying to do something that's only been done once before in American history in the late 19th century, when Grover Cleveland came back after missing one term, losing an election, and then coming back. And what's at stake depends on who you're listening to. If you listen to the Democrats and Joe Biden, democracy is on the line. That Donald Trump, according to the Democrats, poses an existential threat to America's democracy, and that he will be an autocrat if he returns to power. If you listen to the Republicans and Donald Trump, they will tell you that another term of the Democrats and Joe Biden will run this country into the ground, that the policies will bankrupt the nation, will be flooded with immigrants, and gas prices and inflation will go sky high. So very opposing views depending on which political camp you're in. And
tell us a little more. You gave us some insight into the types of messages that are front and center for these candidates. But tell us a little more about their broader messages and the sort of tactics that these two front runners are employing in their bid to appeal to voters this election cycle, but also especially in the battleground states.
Yes, the battleground states are key because there's only a handful, perhaps 6 states, that are really going to determine the outcome of this election because of the system we have. It's not the popular vote that gets you elected president. It's the electoral votes, and the larger states have more electoral votes, but even small states can sway the election too. Basically, what we're seeing, the messaging is very much focused on the opposing candidate. Issues don't seem to be having a lot of impact. For example, the Democrats are out there saying, look at all these accomplishments that Joe Biden has made during his 3 years in office. That seems to be falling flat. But now we're seeing Joe Biden on the campaign trail talking more and more about Donald Trump personally. And that seems to be rallying the base because really very few people in this country are undecided. Or the undecideds are saying, I don't want to vote for either of these candidates because they're both very unpopular relative to past elections. So the messaging is to sort of rally the base, to make sure for the Democrats to get black voters, especially black women, the youth vote. The Hispanic vote seems to be splitting more between the Republicans and Democrats. And to get those who voted for Joe Biden the last time to come out again.
So each making it a referendum on the other.
Correct. But they need, because there are so few undecided voters, they have to get, Donald Trump has to get his voters out again from the last two elections, and we've seen some softening of that with the performance that Nikki Haley, the last standing Republican contender, the last woman standing, is still getting double digits, even though she's really no longer campaigning in Republican primaries.
You spoke to me earlier about one thing you think people are missing in this election cycle. Tell me a little more. I found that fascinating.
Sure. It's the third-party candidates. Now, we've had them in the past. They never win. Perhaps the most significant contender was way back in the early 20th century when former President Theodore Roosevelt ran as an independent on the Bull Moose Party. Okay, and this year we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He is the son of the assassinated former Attorney General, who was the brother of John F. Kennedy, who was also assassinated. But most of the Kennedy family has disowned Robert F. Kennedy Jr. because of his policies, and they're supporting Joe Biden. That said, he has this name value, and because he is now, at least at this point, the most significant independent candidate, just getting thousands of votes here and there in these swing states could determine who wins that particular state and the electoral votes. It's thought that Kennedy probably will take more votes from Biden than Trump, but that remains to be seen. So we really need to watch how he performs. In some states, he's already in double digits, and we're very early in the game as far as the third-party candidate goes.
Now, of course, we've had a good look at sort of Joe Biden's foreign policy, but with the rest of the world watching, what kind of shifts could we see in U.S. foreign policy should Donald Trump return to the White House? Well,
I think we saw very much during his 4 years what his policies were like as far as foreign policy. Basically threatening NATO that unless they raise the percentage of defense spending of their GDP, that he didn't feel like it was worth defending certain countries. He also made noises about the alliances that we have with Japan and South Korea, the war between Ukraine and Russia. He said if he gets back in power, he'll settle that within a day. And people, pundits are saying that would not be to Ukraine's advantage. And of course, he's been a very strong supporter of Israel. And what we're seeing now, obviously, is pressure on Joe Biden and the Democrats to be less accommodating to Israel and put more pressure, as we've seen this week here in Washington, on the Israelis not to go ahead with for example, the invasion of Rafah in the Gaza Strip.
We've got very little time, but I just wanted you to tell me about at least one major challenge that each of these candidates will have to overcome if they want to take the White House. I
think, as I hinted at, it's getting out the vote of their bases, how to maintain enthusiasm where a lot of people are saying, okay, I may have voted for this person before, I'm really not that enthusiastic about them this time, and the age factor. And again, that's where we could see these protest votes for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who really has no chance of winning, but could be a spoiler, perhaps more for Biden's reelection than for Trump getting back into power.
Well, Steve Herman, I don't know of a single person who is not going to be watching this election coming up, and we know you're going to be doing some excellent reporting then as well. Steve Herman is VOA's chief national correspondent. Steve, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to take a short break here on Straight Talk Africa, and when we return, Senegal has just elected Africa's youngest president in a poll that very nearly did not happen. Plus, we'll look at other election trends across the continent. Straight Talk Africa will be back in a moment.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories. that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in You're with Straight Talk Africa. Welcome back. It was the election that very nearly did not happen. Just weeks ago, Senegal's road to the 2024 presidential polls seemed uncertain and overshadowed by deadly protests. Today, the West African nation is on the verge of making history following peaceful elections on Sunday. Senegal has a new president-elect, the man from the main opposition, Bassirou Diomaye Faye. And when he officially takes office in a few months, Faye will become Africa's youngest president. VOA's Nairobi bureau chief and regional correspondent Mariama Diallo reports.
In his first public address, Senegalese President-elect Bassirou Diomaye Faye thanked his supporters and pledged to bring solutions to some of the problems he says his country is facing.
I will govern with humility and with transparency. I will work to get rid of corruption in all sectors and will work toward rebuilding our institutions.
Faye says it's time to bring calm to the country after outgoing President Macky Sall tried to postpone the February elections until December, plunging the country into a brief political crisis.
National reconciliation and rebuilding our fundamental ways of living together. The pre-electoral crisis we lived through cost some people their lives and many were jailed. We hope to turn the page and reconcile people's hearts and the Senegalese people.
Sunday's official election results have not yet been published, but Faye's supporters say they are satisfied with what they have seen so far.
We were hoping to win with over 70% in the first round, but it seems like we are at 57%. It's only preliminary numbers, but we hope that number will be even higher.
We lived through moments that almost pushed Senegal into chaos, but thank God everything is back in place now. We had a transparent presidential election. Candidate Diomaye Faye was elected with a comfortable margin. What we must do now is reconcile the Senegalese people, as Diomaye said in his speech, and transform the country's economy.
Earlier at the ruling party's coalition headquarters, Amadou Ba, the coalition lead candidate who lost the election to Faye, told reporters about a conversation he had with the president-elect.
He told us he congratulated him, he's happy for his victory, and he wishes him well.
I wish him success, and may God accompany him as he carries out his various missions and goals for our glorious nation and for the well-being of our population.
As Ba's supporters try to digest their candidate's loss in the first round that saw 17 candidates vying for the top job, tensions of the last few months seem to be fading away and being replaced by the hope that Senegal's reputation as a beacon of democracy in the region will soon be restored.
Well, let's go to Mariama Diallo in Senegal. She joins us from the capital, Dakar. Mariama, great to see you. What an exciting time it seems there in Senegal. Look, Faye has been described in international media as the
unexpected president? Because, of course, it is Ousmane Sonko who has actually been the formidable, powerful opposition candidate here. But, you know, he won't be the president now. How do people feel about the fact that it is now, in fact, Faye and not Sonko who will be the president now? Essentially, Plan B goes to State House.
Well, thank you very much, Heidi, for having me today. The strategy that they came up with, that Ousmane Sonko came up with in the beginning, basically paid off because he knew that he was barred from running because of a previous defamation conviction. So if he didn't run then and didn't put another candidate forward, then maybe they would not have won. So he had decided early on to endorse Bassirou Diomaye Faye. Basically, it's a coalition. So he looked at the best person, the most electable person, I'm thinking, and decided this is the guy I'm going to endorse. And even while they were campaigning, although they had a very short time to campaign because both of them were in jail, they decided to say that Diomaye was Sonko and Sonko is Diomaye. So basically, you know, showing their similarities, their goals, their thinking about Senegal. And I think people at the end decided we're going to go with Diomaye. And in fact, it will be very interesting. Your question is a very good question about who's going to really be taking the decisions, because the two of them, you see them all the time. But I have to say, when he was making that speech the other day at the Radisson Blu, he actually was there on his own. Sonko was not seen. I was asking, is he here? Because usually you see them together. Although also when they were campaigning, they had decided at some point, because they didn't have enough time to be in every place together, they actually split. So one person will do this part of Senegal and the other person will do the other part of Senegal. So I think the strategy really paid off.
Absolutely, and I've seen some of his speeches. He does strike a figure who has essentially, you know, come into his own for a relative, you know, unknown or outsider, especially for those of us outside of the country. But Mariama, we've seen congratulations coming in from several political figures in Senegal. But what about President Macky Sall? What's been the word from him?
Well, I'm actually going to just go ahead and read you part of his tweet, his reaction. He had said, basically, je salue, I'm going to read it in French and just translate very quickly in English. Je salue le bon déroulement de l'élection présidentielle du 24 mars. Je félicite le vainqueur Bassirou Diomaye Faye, que les tendances donnent gagnant. C'est la victoire de la démocratie sénégalaise. Basically, he saluted the way the elections took place in transparency, in calm, without a lot of issues. The other thing is that he congratulated Bassirou Diomaye Faye, and he also said that this is basically a victory for the Senegalese democracy.
Well, even defeat sounds better in French sometimes, doesn't it? Mariama, what happens next now in terms of wrapping up this phase of the election and as we move forward now to Inauguration Day?
Well, the fact that the main rival to Bassirou Diomaye Faye had conceded the candidate Amadou Ba from the basically the ruling party coalition leader who conceded. I think in about a few hours, in fact, it's almost 2 p.m. here. I think at 5 p.m. in about 3 hours, we're supposed to go to the tribunal of Dakar to actually, you know, listen to. They are going to be giving the provisional results, they said, and so we're going to go through that, and I'm sure they'll explain what the next steps are once, you know, all the results are certified and everything. I think Macky Sall is supposed to be done. His term ends on April 2nd. April 4th is usually Independence Day for Senegal, but I think once his term ends, then, you know, the arrangements of when the inauguration will be and what the next steps and everything that's going to be going on in the next few weeks and few months will take place.
Well, we'll keep an eye on events and developments there in Senegal. VOA's Mariama Diallo doing some excellent reporting for us and speaking to me from Dakar in Senegal. Mariama, thank you. Well, Africa looks set for its own bumper election year, with a third of the region, that's over a dozen countries, headed to the polls in 2024. We're going to pull up a map here for you so you can see what exactly that looks like. Analysts say the outcome of these elections across the continent will tell us whether democracy in Africa is deepening or in decline. Well, here to help us better understand how these elections could shape the geopolitical landscape, I'm joined by McDonald Lewanika. He's a political analyst and director at the Accountability Lab. He joins us via Skype from Harare in Zimbabwe. McDonald, a warm welcome to Straight Talk Africa. I want to start off here with developments out of Senegal. What is your assessment of how this election played out? I mean, given the fact that there was so much uncertainty and quite a lot of political chaos just weeks ago, look at where we are now with the man who will become Africa's youngest president. What is your take?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of what has been coming out of Senegal is very, very inspirational stuff. But more importantly, beyond the inspiration, it is a triumph for democracy, indeed, a triumph for institutions. Because remember, a lot of this is happening against the will of President Sall, who had wanted to stay on, but the courts overturned that decision. So there is something to be said about the strength and independence of institutions. There is something to be said about the will of the Senegalese people to continue on the democratic path. I think over the course of the last year or so, there have been numerous protests associated with these issues of elections in support of Sonko, who we have been talking about. And finally, we are here. So it's not just about electing Africa's youngest leader. I think we are proud of that. But more importantly, we are proud of the Senegalese people and the triumph of democratic practice and culture that they have demonstrated through this election.
I'm going to come back a little later on again to what you just talked about there about age. But Ousmane Sonko was, of course, barred from running for president, and now his ally will occupy the highest office in the land. We spoke to Mariama Diallo about this a little earlier on. Faye has been described as sort of the plan B candidate, a proxy for Sonko, a replacement essentially. But could this complicate Faye's presidency? I mean, can we expect Ousmane Sonko to essentially be calling the shots from the sidelines or behind the scenes?
I think that suspicion is there, that something like that could happen. But again, I come back to the issue of institutions and the triumph of institutions and ideas. I think part of what needs to be remembered is that Sonko, even though he was popular and he was indeed the main opposition candidate, he was not just standing for Sonko's ideas. He was standing for ideas that a lot of Senegalese people, including Faye, President-elect Faye, also stood for. They were coming from the same institution, presiding over a movement that they built together. So even though we do expect some cooperative governance to take place, I think it would be unfair to label President-elect Faye at this particular point in time as any kind of a puppet president, so to speak, who will be controlled by Sonko. I think that there will be respect for the idea of change that they were sponsoring. There will be respect for the idea of independence of institutions and building democratic culture and improving the economy of Senegal that they both basically stood for.
Yeah, as you say, more about ideas than personalities here. But McDonald, a personality that has loomed large in Senegalese politics for a while now is that of President Macky Sall. What does this election outcome do for his legacy? And what is the lesson here for other leaders in Africa who use delay tactics or imprison opposition figures? I mean, none of this is new, we know that. But there is now a new generation, it seems, of players in the political arena on the continent.
Yeah, and let us remember that President Sall himself was part of that emerging generation.
Absolutely.
In the African continent. And I think that a lot of the things that he has done over the course of the last couple of years, he had begun to taint his reputation and taint his legacy. But during the course of this year, I think that there have been meaningful attempts at salvaging that legacy. So first and foremost, respecting the will of the decisions of the courts to ensure that these elections took place before the end of his term is something that is commendable. His commendation of the elections and the results is read by the tweets that our colleague in Senegal just read, are all part and parcel of the process of beginning to salvage that legacy and salvage that reputation. More importantly, they are part and parcel of ensuring that Sall continues to be a fairly important part of the narrative through allowing a transition that the people want to actually take place, which is something that we don't see in other places on the continent.
McDonald, I want to turn to other elections on the continent. We know that more than a dozen African countries heading to the polls this year. Which elections are you going to be watching particularly closely?
Yeah, well, I'm going to try to watch all of them, but I'm especially interested in the Ghanaian elections. I'm especially interested, obviously, as someone who's in Southern Africa, in the South African election, the Namibian election, the Botswana election, and the Mozambique elections, for a variety of reasons.
And to that point, if you look at the ANC in South Africa, SWAPO in Namibia, and of course the BDP in Botswana, Frelimo in Mozambique, 2024 will also be a litmus test for liberation movements. You come from a country where the liberation movement still looms large, but what do you think this election cycle reveals about the future of liberation politics, especially in Southern Africa, where it has been so intractable?
Yeah, I think 2024 and the elections that are coming in these countries definitely point to liberation movements in decline. If you look at the trends in Namibia, if you look at the trends in South Africa itself, the liberation movements, the ANC and SWAPO, as you have mentioned, have been slowly suffering some attrition on account of other opposition groups, some of them which have splintered from the ANC and SWAPO itself. So 2024 is definitely a challenging year for liberation movements, including Frelimo as well, on account of that attrition that has been taking place over time. In South Africa, for the ANC, I think it's especially poignant because this is an election that is taking place 30 years post 1994, post freedom, and for the first time, they are very serious and huge splits at leadership level where the ANC is concerned. ANC presidents have always differed, but President Thabo Mbeki did not go off to form a political party. President Zuma has done that, and we are yet to see what the impact of that is going to be. But at the moment, the trends seem to suggest that the ANC is going to suffer a heavy blow on account of the emergence of MK, Mkhonto Sizwe, but also on account of rising fortunes for the opposition political parties on account of poor economic performance and governance on the part of the ANC itself.
Just briefly, McDonald, we spoke about this earlier. Do you think by and large that electorates in Africa crave young leadership or simply good, different leadership from what they have had for so long?
Yeah, well, the short answer is that definitely electorates on the continent prefer young leaders. You must remember that Africa is a young continent. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of our people are actually young people, and increasingly young people are refusing to be considered as leaders of tomorrow and are saying that we are living today and we should lead today. This is something that is common across the board. If you go to Tanzania, there are opposition movements that are led by young people there, like Zito Zuberi Kabwe. If you come to Zimbabwe, our own main opposition leader is not yet 45 or just turned 45, and in South Africa with the EFF and so on, it's all about young leadership. So there is a yearning for that, in part because we believe generally that generational change will lead to changes in the ways that we govern. You talked earlier about liberation movements. Liberation movements tend to think that they preside over our states, not necessarily on account of the votes that we give them, but on account of their efforts in the liberation struggle. Mm-hmm. So the sooner people change them, the sooner that the forms of government and regimes on the continent change. And that is a fairly popular sentiment.
Well, it's definitely going to be an interesting year. McDonald, thank you for your time and for your insights. It was really, really interesting. That was McDonald Lewanika. He's a political analyst and director at Accountability Lab. He spoke to me there from Harare in Zimbabwe. And that is where we will leave it for this week. I'm Haydé Adams. Thank you to all our affiliate stations bringing you this show throughout the African continent. And thank you for always joining us on TV, radio, and online. I will see you next time. Until then, it is goodbye.